Death had become a reality of flight.
Death could be a passenger on virtually any flight. I can attest to that fact. More than 30 years ago, I went flying with 14 of my crew members, and for more than a third of that crew, that would be their last flight. Only fate, bad luck, or destiny would decide whether death could take control of your aircraft. This story salutes the pioneers of U.S. aviation history, those men and women who risked their lives for the sheer passion of flying. In this film, you will see how they flirted with death and eventually succumbed. Please admire their passion for flying. Do not focus on the details of their demise.
Born in San Francisco in 1877, Lincoln Beechey worked hard to support his father, a blind Civil War veteran. Lincoln ran his own bicycle shop and by age 15 was adept at repairing small engines and motorcycles. He and his brother Hillary were fascinated with the Bay Area's long history of aerial experimentation and interested in anything that took to the air. At 17, Lincoln began his career as a dirigible pilot, helping to build and fly the famous California Arrow, powered with a Glenn Curtiss engine. He later built his own dirigible and used it to fly around the Washington Monument, landing on the White House lawn as a publicity stunt. Another time, he piloted his dirigible, nicknamed the Rubber Cow, over New York City, only to crash into one of the buildings and end up in the East River. He was lucky enough to swim away with only a scathed ego. The 1910 Air Show at Dominguez Field near Los Angeles, California, was a pivotal event in Beechey's aviation career. It was there that Beechey raced his dirigible against a fixed-wing aircraft and lost. Lincoln never flew a slower craft again. He had a need for speed. Beechey learned to fly at the Curtiss Flying School in Hammondsport, New York. The school founder, Glenn Curtiss, was a motorcycle mechanic who had unsuccessfully attempted to collaborate with the Wright brothers. Curtiss opened the school in his hometown, becoming a competitor to the Wrights in the fledgling aviation industry. During Beechey's first flight, he stalled the plane and crashed. Luckily, he was uninjured. Curtiss was reported to mumble Beechey should go back to his Rubber Cow, but Beechey stayed and eventually became one of Curtiss's most successful stunt pilots and air show money maker. Beechey's daring and flair for stunt flying was vividly exhibited in 1911 when he flew his aircraft over Niagara Falls, circled, and then amazed the crowds by flying under Honeymoon Bridge. On another occasion, he raced a steam locomotive, letting his wheels touch the top of the moving train. Beechey's fame as a daredevil grew. At the 1911 Chicago Air Show, he won several prizes, including the coveted altitude record by soaring to the amazing height of 11,578 feet, as verified by his onboard barograph. Beechey took the fledgling aviation community to the pinnacle of flamboyance when he and an Army officer passenger shot ducks from their airplane while aloft over the Potomac River. The press ridiculed him as the flying fool and held him personally responsible for other aviator deaths who tried to duplicate his outlandish feats. Beechey reacted by abruptly retiring from flying in May of 1913. But his retirement lasted only a few months. Glenn Curtiss had perfected a new high-powered aircraft capable of aerial acrobatics, and Frenchman Adolphe Pugot successfully completed the first inside loop. The lure was too great for Beechey to stay in retirement. Returning to Hammondsport, New York, Beechey's first flight resulted in tragic consequences. Two naval officers and their girlfriends were perched atop a hangar to watch the famous aviator fly back and forth. Spying the appreciative group, Beechey guided his craft for a flyover salute. Just as he approached the hangar, Beechey's foot slipped off the controls and the airplane dipped down, striking the group of observers, knocking them to the ground. One of the women died, the others were seriously injured. Beechey was devastated and retired a second time. Once again, the retirement was short-lived. Competition at the San Diego Air Show just a month later proved too seductive. It was in San Diego, Beechey looped the loop and became the first American to fly upside down, both fascinating and terrifying the crowd with his aerobatics. Beechey became a shooting star. He was the first to take off and land an airplane inside a building, performing the stunt inside the Machinery Palace on the grounds of the San Francisco World's Fair in 1913. Beechey's skill at the controls of the aircraft led to several significant aviation practices for safe recoveries in flight. He perfected the long glide from altitude following engine failure, called volplaning, and his spiral glide to the safe landing became a hallmark of Beechey's exhibitions. He was the first to dare to deliberately put his aircraft into a spin and then kick the rudder in the direction of the spin while adding power. This trick became the accepted practice for aviators to recover from spins which previously had resulted in disasters. The flying exhibition season of 1914 belonged to Lincoln Beechey. He performed the loop more than 1,000 times and competed against legendary race car driver Barney Oldfield in exhibition races dubbed Races of the Century. To the delight of the crowd, Beechey would often fly low enough to knock the hat off Oldfield's head. Rumor has it that the two showmen took turns letting each other win. It's estimated that Beechey performed in hundreds of cities across the country and earned nearly $250,000 in 1914, a sizable sum even by today's standards. With the onset of World War I in Europe, Beechey and many others were convinced of the importance of airplanes in warfare. On September 29, 1914, Beechey circled the nation's capital, sailed past the Washington Monument, and waved to President Wilson on the White House lawn in hopes of impressing lawmakers of the viability of aviation and its military application. One of Beechey's most exciting exhibitions was in San Francisco on New Year's Day, 1915. As a prelude to the Panama Pacific Exhibition, Beechey took flight and dropped mock bombs over a model of the USS Oregon anchored in the harbor. Positioned nearly a mile offshore, many spectators thought the model ship was real. When puffs of smoke appeared after Beechey made his passes overhead, many in the crowd of 50,000 thought the aviator had indeed bombed the Oregon and its crew. It was all for show, and a showman he was, one of the best. A few months later, on March 14, 1915, Beechey again took to the air at the World's Fair Pan-Pacific Expo, this time for his last flight. After taking off in spectacular fashion, Beechey made a loop and flipped the plane on its back to the delight of the massive crowd. However, while performing his death dive, the stunt turned into a reality. Under stress, the wings from the monoplane were ripped from the fuselage and collapsed like an accordion. Beechey and his airplane plunged into San Francisco Bay, a few hundred feet offshore. Ironically, it was divers from the USS Oregon who retrieved Beechey's body from the bottom of the bay a half hour later. He was reportedly still strapped in his seat and had apparently survived the crash only to drown, trapped in the twisted wreckage. At the age of 38, the man who would later be referred to as the father of aerobatics was dead. Beechey's crash and fatality was a death knell to aviation air shows in the United States. While many called Beechey the Flying Fool, Orville Wright dubbed him the most wonderful flyer of all. Thomas Alva Edison wrote, "I was startled and amazed when I saw that youngster take to the sky and send his airplane through the loop and then follow that feat with an upside-down flight. I could not believe my own eyes, and my nerves would tingle for many minutes." The daring tales of Lincoln Beechey lived on for many years in stories, poems, and even a rather macabre rhyme made up by children jumping rope.
Lincoln Beechey thought it was a dream to go up to heaven in a flying machine. Machine broke down and down he fell. Instead of going to heaven, he went to...
In 1922, residents of San Francisco, Beechey's hometown and site of his failed flight, reported visions of a ghostly aviator hovering in a phantom plane above the bay. Perhaps not even death has stopped the man who owned the sky, Lincoln Beachey.